Hey guys, what's up and welcome to a new Tesla update video. So today, as per usual, let's go over Tesla stock. Let's go over the market. Let's talk about what is happening in this, kind of a kangaroo market, honestly. I'll give you my thoughts moving forward and all that good stuff. If you enjoyed, don't forget to hit that like button. This is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my technical analysis, thoughts and charts, updates, etc. Well, again, I do share my thoughts with my members, again, every single day as the market's open and trading, again, throughout the entire trading day. So definitely check that out. That link is down below in the description of any video. Just click the first link right here. You can see, and you get access to the page to subscribe if you wish. Again, it's just $3 a month. I'm not trying to make it something crazy, something insanely expensive. Just $3 a month, access to all my Tesla updates, broader market updates, SPY, Qs, VIX, options flow, different time frame analysis. $5 includes NVDA, $7 includes the full package, access to our private Discord. We have a tier 3 chat room. I do chart reviews every Sunday with members and posts that are essentially not Tesla, not NVIDIA, over on the private YouTube session that I share in the markets when there's something, worth mentioning, essentially. So again, lots of heavy there, guys. Definitely check it out. But yeah, jumping into a Tesla, closing the day, down, we'll say a humble 1.05% on the day, closing at $391 and change. Compared to the market, definitely a bit of an underperformance. It's SPY and the Qs getting a bit of a bounce here, right? Still bouncing into territory that needs to get overcome, right? I wouldn't say the market is fully safe yet. It's a good start. We'll go over that, towards the end of the video. But Tesla is testing key levels here, obviously, right? There's two key levels, and this is what I shared with members about this morning, actually, as we were testing down here, right? Pretty much a double bottom potential. But I'm still not fully convinced the bottom on Tesla isn't just yet. I personally, I still believe that there is a decent chance, a more likely than not chance, I should say, that we do actually make our way down lower. Now, thankfully, looking at it here, that doesn't look too bad. It's not too much lower, right? Ultimately, it's going to be another maybe 8% for Tesla in one day. That's nothing, right? Tesla 8%, 1 or 2 days, nothing, right? This thing moves 8% every single day almost sometimes. You know what I mean? So not a huge deal, honestly. Even if we get this drop down to retest these kind of, major levels, which I still think is the more likely outcome, to be completely honest with you, right? But, testing these levels down here, about another 8%. Not the worst thing in the entire world by any means. But, the reason I still believe that's the case is because, well, nothing is still showing me the fact that Tesla is ready to bottom out and head higher, right? And retest all-time highs, things like that. The market still looks like it's not fully convinced yet that the bottom is in, which again we'll go over very soon. But if there is the chance, right, there is still a bullish chance here, right? The bullish chance on Tesla stock, if the bulls really just want to avoid this drop down, right? If this is just something that doesn't, the stock doesn't want to do, essentially, that is going to require essentially this double bottom holding. So in my opinion, watch for about these lows here that we set today and these lows back here, pretty much at around 383, 384, something like that, right? Watch for that, right? If we start closing, one of two things, if we start closing daily candles below this trend line and or below this sort of region down here where this potential double bottom sits right now, that to me will be that trigger that, substantially increases the probabilities in my eyes that we had lower and we come down to test this, substantially large kind of support zone now, old resistance, new support zone waiting to be tested ultimately, right? That's kind of the way I'll be looking at it here. You know what, let's actually delete this and let's go ahead and do something that looks a lot like this. I want to go from all the way up here. This is as high as it can go. To somewhere around here, sort of this major region right down here, right? Again, major area of resistance, support, right? Simple stuff. Again, I do think that's still the more likely path, personally speaking. Again, but let's see. Now, what would have to convince me, right? What needs to be done to convince me personally that maybe we don't go down there? What if we actually continue holding this level? And maybe from here, we actually just bounce and go straight to all-time highs. Market rips, everyone's happy. Market's going to new all-time highs, blah, 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 blah. What needs to happen for that to actually be the reality? Well, number one, obviously, this needs to continue holding, right? This and the trend line, obviously, that needs to continue holding. We don't want to see daily closures below either of those two levels. That's number one. That's the most obvious one. However, we need to see strength return to the stock, right? The stock looks, I wouldn't say it looks particularly weak, but it doesn't look strong, at least to me right now, right? And the reason it doesn't look strong is because it's sitting at levels where, first of all, it's below the 14s, we'll say roughly, right? Every single attempt has been completely thwarted so far. We could potentially get an early, next week rally. It's Thanksgiving, it's a shorter week. I would expect the volatility to kind of slow down a little bit. If volatility slows down, they mean the market might get some room to breathe. Maybe not a substantial rally, but at least some level of a pop back to the upside. And that can absolutely bring Tesla back up to sort of, this honestly retesting the 14s again. But there is significant resistance in the 14s where we have these all three exponential moving averages now sitting. We have the 9 here, we have the 50 here, we have the 21 slowly making its way down, to the 14s as well. So there's a lot of resistance sitting here. So for the bulls to really, like, for me to get convinced that, number one, we don't go down here, and number two, we actually just head higher, we need to get back above the 14s, number one, which will also start to, potentially reclaim those exponential moving averages. That's number one. Number two, right? What else needs to happen for me to be convinced about that? Well, we need to get back above it. And ultimately, with this trend line, it needs to snap, right? Because again, ultimately, it comes down to what comes first, which trend line snaps first, but not just like a quick little, price going down below it temporarily kind of thing, and then we still close above or below it kind of thing. It's more of like, which one snaps but closes above or below? So like, does the daily candle close above or does the daily candle close below, right? Which one happens first? That's still kind of that bigger picture. And like I said, if we get above that and we start closing daily candles above that, that would be a good sign. Exponential moving averages would be back into bullish mode, and that would be a very positive development moving forward to, potentially get a retest of all-time highs, if not, maybe even make new all-time highs. However, while they continue leaning bearish, pointing straight down, while the 14s continue being a resistance, and any pop, it just continues getting sold off, and ultimately a break below these key levels down here, like I just mentioned, that would, I still believe that down is the more likely pathway for Tesla, unfortunately. Now, again, I do also believe that once we get down here, it'll take some time to, stabilize, we'll get some balances, bounce up here, bounce up here, maybe, there will be some stabilization. That will take time. It will take time. It can easily take a few weeks, right? So keep that in mind. Honestly, the sooner it happens, the better, because then we can start preparing for that center rally, in my opinion, right? But I do still believe that, coming down here, stabilization, and then head higher is the more likely outcome, personally speaking, still, right? That's going to be how I will personally be viewing the stock as of right now. Now, with that being said, the weekly is also sitting at this major trendline support, right? This is pretty much more or less the same one that I've been talking about on the daily. The weekly is slightly different, but pretty much the premise is the same, where, again, if there is a spot for the bulls to hold, if they really just do not want to make a visit back down to retest this sort of massive level that I still think is going to be retested, we have the 21 weekly exponential moving average sitting here as support. We have the trend line sitting as support. We have the potential double bottom sitting as support. This area right here, this sort of mid 380s to about 390, that is this is the level to hold, guys. I mean, this pretty much is it. If we lose this, we do lose a lot of momentum. We do come back down to here, and this will take some time to stabilize before I do believe we'll go higher. But it will require that sort of, shorter term pain and a little bit of suffering, if you will, first. So that's kind of how I look at it, guys. Pretty simple stuff. And the final thing to talk about is, of course, going to be the SMI, right? Probably one of my favorite indicators. Honestly, I do trade a lot around this SMI, especially on Tesla stock. It's actually been quite potent. For instance, when we fell down here and everything looked dire, it's like, wow, this is really bad. We're about to just waterfall down, but we didn't. It's interesting. Why do we not waterfall down? Well, the SMI was already near the bottom of the spectrum over here. You can see this, right? And as we got to the bottom of the spectrum here, I mentioned how, I do think we're going lower, but I wouldn't be surprised if we stabilize and chop around this area for quite some time, easily a couple weeks up to even. We're already in about just over a week, right? Could get a bit more. We could even chop here more for most of next week as we enter a shorter week. We have no trading on Thursday. I think Friday is about a half day, if I'm not mistaken. So we could continue bouncing here and we could continue chopping until we finally pick a direction, maybe the week after, right? Absolutely. But that's kind of the thing I'll be watching for. But the SMI, it is recovering above these sort of, kind of oversold, if you will, levels, which is, good and bad depending on which side of the coin you're on. But the point is that, it does open up more room to the downside, because now there's, well, you can see here, right? There's distance now. There's, if we move down to the downside, well, this has room to move down with it as well, which makes sense. Now, the cool thing will be is the fact that if we move down here and this thing moves down but doesn't make a new low, this will start making a bullish divergence, because the stock makes a lower low, this SMI makes a high low. That will be pretty good, actually. But again, one step at a time. So again, a lot of jumbling, but again, TLDR, watch for this support level here, watch for the resistance up here, watch for the 14s being that mediary, but below that with the bearish EMAs, I continue leaning bearish, and then a break below should send this lower, a break above should send this higher. I continue leaning down. Let's go over the broader market quickly, right? Let's talk about what's happening over at the, the VIX, for instance, right? What's happening at the VIX? Well, it's still holding strong, right? This is not what you want to be seeing as a bull. This thing is still pretty strong. Excuse me. It's coming down to bullish EMAs. It's coming down to retest, important levels. If the bulls, if this market really wants to continue higher, this thing needs to come down more. This thing needs to, in my opinion, it needs to get smacked down under the 20s, right? This thing needs to get back under the 20s ASAP. The fact that it's lingering up here this much tells me the fact that the volatility and the risk for further downside in the market absolutely has not been alleviated by any means, right? The risk is still very much alive. Now it can completely get pummeled down, starting Monday, for instance, absolutely. But while it's still this elevated, I'm sure you can tell based on the recent price action, there's still chop, volatility, and even continued risk, downside risk in the markets, right? That still continues to persist essentially. So this is going to need to get smacked down, right? Below 20, okay, things are definitely going to start looking a little bit healthier, a little bit better, right? Especially closing below 20. But once this thing really gets back below this orange line, essentially below 17.5 roughly, then the market will most likely start to stabilize. And I think that Christmas rally will begin. But until then, guys, caution is still, not financial advice, but caution is still somewhat warranted up at these more elevated levels, where again, the volatility is still, I wouldn't say sky high, but, definitely not low. Let's just say that. SPY, right? What's the SPY doing? Well, SPY and the Qs both had a nice little sweep this morning, which is good, but it did hold pretty important levels on SPY, which is going to be around the sort of, mid-ish, we'll say 650s. And it is getting a decent bounce. It is holding pretty well, kind of like what it did here. But the difference is the fact that the EMAs were completely bullish here, unquestionably. Now we're actually coming, here we went into the EMAs bullishly and then bounced off of them. Here we're coming into the EMAs bearishly. This can change, of course. Like there's obviously many times where the stock market looked like it was going into bearish EMAs. Like for instance, this is a pretty good case right here. You can see, we were kind of coming back up into pretty bearish looking EMAs for the most part, right? And then we just went above it and, like no one's business. So it's not, again, it's not like a, perfect indicator. Or here when we had a massive fall, and this just looked like a very obvious dead cat. Like there's no way this is not a dead cat into the bearish EMAs into lower. It wasn't. It actually wasn't. It wasn't a bear flag. It wasn't a dead cat. We continued higher. So, the market is strong. The market is made to go up, right? That's just, I do want to make that very, very clear. I don't want to fear monger. The market's made to go up. Its purpose is to go up. That is the purpose. However, with the VIX being elevated, I can't fully disregard the fact that there is potential on SPY and the Qs for one more low into about the, we'll say mid to low 640s roughly, somewhere around here to really get a retest of the zone here. That's still a very real possibility. So I definitely want to keep that option open still. But with that being said, I do believe that the market around here or where we are right now, straight up, I do think one of these levels will be the bottom, whether it's today or whether it's one more leg lower to about, again, 640s roughly, and then we head higher. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But what I do have a crystal ball on is the fact that the SMI is also near the bottom. So at the very least, I would expect some rally and some kind of cool off on the markets. And then from here would be that sort of major test to see how things react into, potential major resistance. Do we just get resisted by it and head down? Or does the market show strength and gap up and get above key levels? That'll take some time. So we'll look into that next week as we potentially enter what could be a potential bounce coming up in the markets, based on how the SMI looks like. Qs look pretty much the same thing, even stronger of a sweep this morning. You can see closing above this trend line, which is good. I like the fact that we're closing above this trend line at about 589 to 590. Just barely, to be fair, not the most convincing close, but we are closing above it. But you can see the EMAs are also starting to flip to the more bearish side. So what do the Qs need to do? Kind of similar to the SPY. Qs are a little bit more straightforward here in my opinion, because this trend line is just the thing to break. Once this trend line breaks on the Qs, bullish. Once the Qs and SPY in general really get back above at least the 9 EMA, ideally the 21 EMA, which is the red line, bullish. And especially once the 9 goes back above the 21, also bullish. So there's a lot of bullish signals to look out for. But, similar to SPY, as long as we continue getting, having issues right around here. So if the Qs continue rallying, maybe coming up to 600 roughly, but we continue having issues around 600 because this was a support. So you can see here, as long as we have issues around here, we can potentially get one more rejection, make one more low, like SPY, like I said, Qs about 570s or so, and then we head higher from there. But ultimately, once this trend line breaks, that's going to be the main thing to watch out for the market to be bullish. Personally, I'm just adding on this dip, and I will continue adding if we continue dipping. That's not a real, I'm not too worried about that by any means. It's the Qs. If you think unless you think the whole market is about to collapse and the U.S. economy is about to just implode, there's a good chance the Qs are probably going to be higher, down the road, right? Let's be completely real here, right? Let's not fear monger. But short term, there could be some headwinds. There could be a bit more pain. In my opinion, again, watch for how price reacts near 600 and watch for this trend line break. Below that, one more low. Above that, we're good to go. Anyways, that's all I got for you guys. Let's take a look at options flow on Tesla stock. Take a peek as to what's happening. A lot of kind of mixed flow towards the end of the day. More bearish than bullish flow. That's because the morning was pretty bearish, obviously. But towards the end of the day, it's definitely a lot more mixed. You can see some pretty aggressive bullish and bearish flow for 11/28, which is of course next week. So in my opinion, it's pretty mixed. Maybe slightly bullish leaning, but it's definitely pretty mixed. I wouldn't put too much weight into one way or the other for now. Again, especially when the volatility is this elevated. I don't think anyone actually truly knows, to be completely honest with you, right? But all we can do is just let these kind of major levels and trend lines kind of, work their thing, work their magic until we get stronger confirmations one way or the other. But anyways, I digress. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you to Monday. Peace.